The government just released the new Dietary Guidelines for Americans, and they're creating quite a buzz. Here's why they are so noteworthy and what they mean for you. Now, for decades, dietary guidelines have felt kind of disconnected from reality. They were often rigid and at odds with both modern science and kind of everyday life. They didn't include options for metabolically unhealthy individuals, and they really opened the door for ultra-processed, high-refined carb foods to be included as healthy foods, even if they didn't explicitly state that. So it's refreshing, honestly refreshing, to finally see new dietary guidelines that reflect evidence, common sense, and how people actually eat. Now, these guidelines represent an important shift. Now, not perfection, but real progress. So let's talk about what they got right. First, there's a return to real food, both plant and animal whole foods. The guidelines clearly emphasize this: real whole foods, plant and animals. That shouldn't be controversial. And this matters because nutrition doesn't have to be ideological, right? Humans have always eaten a mix of plant and animal foods, and the science supports that reality. So instead of, demonizing an entire subset of whole animal foods, the guidelines focus on minimally processed foods, nutrient density, and quality over labels. And that means vegetables and fruit, but also meat, poultry, fish, eggs, and dairy, foods that nourish people, support muscle development, help regulate appetite, all these important points of healthy diets and metabolic health. And this balanced approach is really long overdue. So second, along those lines, protein is finally treated as foundational. Protein isn't just a random macronutrient, it's essential for muscle growth and strength, for metabolic health, blood sugar control, satiety, healthy aging. For years, protein was really underplayed while people were encouraged to fill their plates with grains and starches. And the result for many is hunger, muscle loss, metabolic dysfunction. Not for everybody, but for a large subset, that is the result. So these guidelines finally recognize that adequate protein intake targeted to body needs should be a foundation of a healthy diet, and not the RDA to just prevent protein deficiency, but the more moderate 1.2 to 1.5 grams per kilo of ideal body weight that helps promote developing lean muscle and improving metabolic health across the age span. That's practical, that's evidence-based, and it aligns with what clinicians see every day. Now, third is a more honest view of grains and sugars. They don't ban them, but they clearly acknowledge that excessive grain consumption, refined carbohydrates, added sugars, are major contributors to obesity, diabetes, and metabolic disease. And this is a big shift. For many people, especially in a modern food environment, eating fewer grains and sugars simply makes metabolic sense. Reducing pasta, bread, sweets, and sugary drinks helps stabilize blood sugar, reduce insulin signals and spikes, and improve energy levels. This isn't about restriction, it's about restoring balance. And many will point out that prior guidelines did mention reducing added sugar, but they clearly did not go far enough. And by promoting more grains, including refined grains, they implicitly, if not explicitly, helped create the environment for the high-carb processed food environment that we find ourselves in today. Just look at what passes for healthy meals in schools and hospitals with the pancakes and the syrup and the muffins, sugary cereal, fruit juice. That's not healthy. So these guidelines are a great step forward in correcting that. Perhaps the most important and most refreshing change is that the guidelines finally acknowledge something that many of us already know. People with metabolic dysfunction, metabolic disease, insulin resistance may need different dietary approaches. So for the first time, the guidelines openly support low-carbohydrate dietary patterns as a therapeutic option for people with conditions like obesity, type 2 diabetes, hypertension, even fatty liver disease, and more, right? These metabolic dysfunction diseases. This is a major step forward. There are decades of evidence showing that reducing carbohydrates can improve insulin resistance, lower blood sugar, reduce inflammation, and in many cases, reverse chronic diseases. And yet until now, this option was often ignored or even discouraged in official guidance. So offering low-carb approaches doesn't force anyone into this diet, right? It simply recognizes that metabolic illnesses require metabolic solutions, and reducing carbohydrates is one powerful option. So what ties all of this together is a shift away from dogma and towards flexibility and reality. The guidelines recognize that people are metabolically different. Food works in context. Dietary patterns matter more than single nutrients, and that's how nutrition works in real life. So healthy people may tolerate more carbohydrates. Metabolically sick individuals may need fewer. Both approaches can be valid when built around whole foods and adequate protein. That's not confusion, That's precision. And what about saturated fat? That's gotten a lot of attention too. The guidelines keep the recommended 10% cap on saturated fat, but we can see in their messaging, as the evidence supports, saturated fat is really not a concern when it comes from whole food sources, eaten in the context of a healthy overall diet, especially a low-carb diet. These guidelines open the door for a more reasonable discussion on how saturated fat can fit into a healthy diet. So these new dietary guidelines won't fix everything overnight. There's still much to be done with the interpretation, the implementation, but they mark an important turning point. They emphasize real food. They value protein. They reduce the overemphasis on grains and sugar, and they finally acknowledge low carbohydrate diets as a legitimate therapeutic option for people who need them most. In a world overwhelmed with chronic disease, this kind of practical, evidence-based, common sense guidance is exactly what we need. So thank you for watching. I hope this was helpful, and please let us know in the comments what you think about the DGA and the path forward. And as always, please like and subscribe and share this with someone who you think may benefit from this message. I'm Dr. Bret Scher. I thank you for watching, and we will see you here next time at Metabolic Mind, a nonprofit initiative of Bazooki Group.